Hi, and welcome back to the Parenting Teens podcast. I have my voice back, so let's today get on with talking about the circle of influence. Now, parenting teenagers, there are many times when parents say to them, "Oh, you're hanging around with the wrong friends," or you could do with learning something different from some extra support after work, school. And there are so many ways in which parents are concerned about their teenagers and young adults with their peer pressure and their social circles. Now, this is a very powerful topic when it comes to personal development for adults, but how can we transpose this over to supporting teenagers and making it a positive experience? So, thinking back to, let's start with what is the circle of influence? Now, there are two versions of this that I'm familiar of. One is actually called the circle of control, which is what is in my control, what is in my influence, and what is outside of my control or influence. So that's three circles, and that's the Stephen Covey version of circle of control. And I don't want to overly confuse that with the circle of influence because that's about what we bring in and how we move things out with regards to interactions. So, very briefly, looking at the circle of control first, what is in my control? First of all, as a parent, this is really powerful to understand this before moving on to the circle of influence. I know, yeah, I had a brain blip. Anyway, it happens. So, when you look at what is in your control, very often it's too easy for parents to want to say, I forbid you to see that friend again, or I don't want you going out with that young boy or that young girl, or I don't want you going to that party, and I don't want you doing this, and I'm banning you from that. And it's very easy as parents with teenagers and young adults to try and impose control, that inner circle where we feel we have control. Now, for me, when we look at control, what is in our control? It's one thing to say, can I control it? And another one to say, should I control it? When you are looking at should I control it, the next step to move out to is the circle of influence. And if it is any way, shape, or form a possibility not to control, but to influence, it's actually far more powerful and builds a lot more trust. And influence is about, instead of saying, I don't want you hanging around with that friend, is about saying, okay, let's have a discussion. What is it you get from hanging about with that friend? What is it that you think is positive for you? And what do you think the detriment could be to you? What do you think that the setbacks could be for you about hanging about with that friend? What happens if they do this or that? How is that going to impact you? And also, if they weren't in your life, what other things you could do or achieve? What other friends could you be hanging around with? And when you have the right conversation with them and you influence in an empowering way, again, not in a manipulative way, because another one to go, oh, well, I don't really think you should be hanging around with them because, and it's very careful again, very easy to move back into borderline control by manipulating. So we're avoiding that. We're going into genuine influence where, as a parent, we give them information, we trigger their thought processes, and we allow them to make the decision. And I'm pretty sure I talked about this a few weeks ago when my daughter was trying to make a decision about some friends, and her friends had this very silly talk going on in the social time and playground at school. And she was struggling with her English lessons. Now, I could have said to her, well, don't hang around with them. But I just said to her, your friends and all this talk that you have is giving you a separate language. So you're trying to talk in this language and then do your English lessons in an English language. And if you practiced your English language in conversation in the playground, it would be easier to transpose that into lessons. And she's like, oh, but if I talk around my friends like that, they'll think I'm stupid or they won't like me or whatever. And she felt like she had to comply with this silly talk. And these are teenagers who were talking like Teletubbies and all, the really silly words and tones and greetings. And it was just crazy, an absolutely crazy time. And there was a broader scale study or research done on how the language of a program can actually affect the development of children and teenagers because of the language that they pick up and how it influences them and how that interferes with their learning process. And this was happening with my daughter. So I had this conversation with her about what it meant to her, about her friends, and what it meant about actually learning her English. And I said, well, if you was to say to your friends, I really want to be able to do my English lessons and get better grades on my homework, be able to pass my tests, and therefore I don't want to do the silly talk. I said, if they laugh at you and if they don't agree with it, I said, are they really worth having as friends? What would you feel about them in that case? And she did give it some thought. And she decided in the end to us to become home educated like her brother, because my son had been failed by the education system for different reasons and had already been home educated for 2 years. So she decided to ask to come out of school to be home educated, to pick up on the things that she'd struggled with at school, and chose her education over friendship. But it was her choice at 11 years old to do that. I gave her the empowerment. So this is the part where the circle of influence builds a tremendous amount of trust between a parent and child versus control. And me saying to her, well, don't hang around with those friends and you need to come out of school and you need to focus on, if I'd have been trying to tell her to do and tell her not to do, she would have felt restricted and overwhelmed. And that is not what we want for teenagers. We want them to feel like they have the freedom of choice. They have the power to actually be involved in their progress, because progress creates confidence, and confidence, well, you get the picture where this is going. So by instilling that in these conversations right from the beginning, it's very powerful. So we have the in control, we have the influence, and then there's out of control. There are many times when with teenagers, they don't feel in control. And when you've been through the conversation with a point of influence and they still feel out of control because it hasn't empowered them, that's the time when sometimes, depending on how they react, sometimes they will say, no, I don't want to do anything about it. And you are left without the ability to control it. And sometimes they will say, I don't know how to deal with this. I can't control it. Like it's not in their control. You're unable to influence them. And they may say, I need your help. And that's the point where your teenager can empower you to support them and give you a little bit of control back. But it means so much more when it's done as a mutual agreement. And I know a lot of parents might think, but the children shouldn't be given the choice to control you. It's not about controlling you. And it is about literally building trust and mutual respect in a way that you support them, you nurture them, you are there for them. There are times when, yeah, there will be occasional times when you have to put your foot down and say, no, this is not one of those times where I'm going to give you the freedom to make your own choice. Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes. If you do it all the time, you lose trust. And then there's those times where when you've worked on the influential part and you have to do that, they will listen to you more. But if you are constantly controlling, don't do this, don't do that, the only way they can take back any control for themselves is to rebel. And rebellion is a sign of being overly controlled. So if you feel like a teenager is being rebellious, have a look at how you can meet them in the middle with that circle of influence by moving out of the circle of control. And then look at how that brings them back into a feeling of control in the circle of influence, it works both ways at the same time mutually. So that is that one. And the other one, for me, circle of influence is about mentoring and how we learn from others. So we've taken quite an in-depth look, which I didn't intend to be that deep about that. But the other circle of influence, so I'm still feeling a bit rough, is about really, it's more about a saying that we become the average of the 10 people we spend the most time with. So you think about you and the 10 people that you spend the most time with. Write them down if you need to, and think about how that influences you or how you have chosen that circle of influence, right? So when you get this concept about this and you can have this conversation with teenagers, it is a really powerful one for teaching them about choosing those friendships and about choosing how to learn in life and find a way to feel empowered in life, right? That circle of influence can be, for a teenager's point of view, their parents, their teachers, their school friends. There could be other family friends. It could be other people and coaches in sports groups or other external activity groups that they do. But then there's also things like TV, music, magazines, and books. So whether they've got a favourite actor or actress that they follow, a favourite musician, you think about a child or a teenager or a young adult who's constantly listening to acid house music and rap and rock music and heavy metal. And if they have got that playing in their ears 3-4 hours a day or more, that is quite a high priority on their circle of influence, because those lyrics are affecting how they think, how they feel, because they're attuning to the type of music, the type of artist, the type of lyrics, right? And the whole emotional vibe around it. They're attuning into that when they listen for extended periods of time. And so understanding that is not about removing them. This is when we then jump back to the circle of influence on the first one. It's about juggling them to create the best version of themselves that they want to become. So when they can start to realize this is not about parents saying you can or can't listen to this, or you must go to this church group and you must never listen to that music and you must not do this, you must not mix with these people, right? That's control. But when we look at the circle of influence and they have a group of friends around them that are perhaps not the best influence, but they don't want to remove those friends because they still have some value over them. Now, this is where I break the circle of influence itself into more tiers. I have, for my life, and I've worked on this for many years, the circle of influence of people that I allow in and out of my home, the people that are on my inner circle, that are close, family and very close friends. Because anybody who's not serving me well in that close circle of influence will be distanced out. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be cut out. Sometimes it means if there's a certain person that they have, like a friend coming to visit the home frequently, and they're a bad influence, and your teenager is aware that they want to make changes but don't want to distance that friend too much, it might be, instead of going in and out the house a great deal, moving them into the next tier. And that is the one I call friends, the friend zone sort of thing, where they still meet them, but they meet them in a mutually agreeable place outside of the home. And this can also happen as adults. We have people that we're friends with that we allow in our home. Then we have people we are friends with that we meet outside. We don't invite them in because our home is a safe space. It's our haven and it's our place where we can be authentic to ourselves. And if people are in and out the house a lot that make us feel uncomfortable, perhaps it's time to look at moving them to the next zone where they're remaining a friend, but we meet them somewhere mutually agreeable. We go out for a walk with them, we go for a coffee with them, we meet them at clubs and groups. These are the kind of people that we might even be friends with at work or at school. And they could be really good friends at school for children and teenagers or at college, university, but don't necessarily come back to the home environment. The next one beyond that is the one I call acquaintances, where we're kind of friends with people and we say hi and we'll stop and have a chat with them in the street. We might ring them up occasionally and have a chat on the phone, like long distance family members. And there are lots of reasons why we might not be that close to somebody. Bear with me. But we don't want to cut them out of our lives entirely. So they're more like on the acquaintance. And even some family members can sit out on that line without dismissing them as family. And then there is the zone outside of that where we don't want people in our zone of influence. We don't want people in any of that circle of influence in the home as friends or as acquaintances. And those are the people we need to put outside the circle of influence. They exist or don't exist, but we don't have to include them in those three circles. And when a teenager understands how those top 10 people within those three tiers affect who they are as an individual, in who they are becoming, and who they are as an authentic person, this is where we get the power to jiggle it a little bit. So the 10 in there, it could have 50 in there, but it's the 10 that are closest to the middle. So you might have one in the middle, two in the next one, and 7 in the acquaintances. That might be all you need. Other people might have 10 in the closest circle that come in and out of their home all the time. It doesn't have to be a fixed way of balancing this. But to have that influence, it doesn't even always have to be people that visit. A teenager or an adult can change their circle of influence by knowing the 10 people around them the most and not necessarily pushing people out, by adding in the top level, somebody that they maybe watch on YouTube as an influencer, but a positive influencer, such as watching programs by Tony Robbins, who is all motivational speech, might be somebody inspirational, more spiritual, like Sadhguru. Could be somebody who does fitness and health and yoga and veganism. And there are loads of ways where we can study somebody's work through YouTube even, or other video platforms, or the internet itself, or through books, or through going to courses and doing online courses. And that studying them moves them into that circle of influence without even having to know them personally. Right? So your children don't necessarily have to remove teenagers out of their life like peers. They just need to put other things in that they take as a more positive influence. And then again, it could be who they listen to with music. And when they understand the power that this has on that circle of influence, it gives them more power to make the right choices. And also understanding how being an authentic version of themselves, and I think this is another conversation we need to have, is maybe next week we'll bring in the conversation about authenticity versus chameleoning, masking, all that kind of thing. So being authentic, we might be the conversation for next week. But when we can really focus on bringing those other things in, maybe getting an extra tutor after school, maybe joining a different group or club so we mix with like-minded people, or maybe just actually saying, they don't want to change the circle of influence they have in terms of people, but to change how they are responding to it, it might mean bringing some people in a circle and putting some people out by a circle. And sometimes people in our life, with no matter how much we like them or with all the best intentions, want to repair things, things can become toxic and just draining. And no matter how much we try, we're unable to repair certain relationships effectively enough to be a positive influence on ourselves. So if we find somebody around us is making us feel drained and irritable and angry and frustrated and overwhelmed and anxious, then maybe there's somebody we need to look at even cutting ties with. I know a lot of people look at cutting ties with family, and too many teenagers end up out on the streets and homeless in hostels, running away and running off with friends or young lovers who disappear and end up places they really shouldn't be, doing things they really shouldn't be doing, getting into addictions and all kinds of other problematic pitfalls from there. And one of the biggest things that could have avoided all of that was a parent being able to sit down with them, talk about being an authentic version of themselves, influencing them through the circle of control, not controlling, but influencing them to feel less empowered and less being controlled into feeling influenced, feeling empowered to be able to make their own choices about who provides a positive influence on them, who they can surround themselves with to be the best version of themselves without feeling lonely, socially awkward, cut out, unwelcome, right? And feeling empowered within the circles they choose to feel appreciated, liked, loved, nurtured, right? To feel encouraged, where they can learn and learn in a safe environment to do something that they really enjoy. And when we do that, we have trust and bonding between the parent and between the teenager, where they're going to come back for more information because they now trust you, instead of saying, my life is overbearing, my parents control everything I do, I have no life of my own, I can't make my own decisions, and therefore I'm going to run away from home. Please, let's avoid that. Please, 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 let's not see so many children running away from home, feeling stressed, depressed, anxious, suicidal, overwhelmed, struggling with addictions, getting involved with the wrong crowds, all because they felt overly controlled and overly parented. And this is, I must say this at this point, is not a criticism on the parenting you've done up till now, because there's something called learned helplessness. And I'm going to put a link down here to an amazing conversation that I had with Rory on the Self-Help Bookshelf podcast yesterday about this very topic. Learned helplessness is how the way we parent our teenagers and our children is because it's the way we were parented. And it's a way that we've learned to do things because it was done to us. And we pay it forward thinking it's the right way to do it. They're getting out of line, we bring them in line. They're getting out of control, we control them. And that's the way very often you would have been raised, and your parents would have handled that with you. And how was your relationship with your parents if it was like that? And if you did do as you were told, how did it make you feel in terms of confidence or anxiety or stress? And has it had a burden on you over the years? And if it has, please go and find the other series on your self-help bookshelf about trauma, understanding trauma, because this all ties in. The 3 different podcasts I've got going on at the moment all tie in around this topic, and they're really powerful. So Emma Oldershaw is doing this little mini series about understanding trauma and how this parenting voice that comes down through generations and generations gets paid forward as that's how I learned to do it because that's how my parents did it to me, and I do it to my children. and the trauma pays forward with it. This is a generation that can break the cycle. We can work on our trauma. Emma Oldershaw is the expert on that, I can guarantee it. We can learn new parenting skills. I can definitely help you with the parenting skills to pay forward new ways forward and ensure we gain their trust. We empower them, we build their confidence, and we help them to build a better future. And the third person who I was speaking to yesterday, Rory Lemon, is also great when it comes to the young adults and adults who are trying to find that way of working into life where they don't feel they belong. They have neurodiversity, they are creative, they want to go into self-employment, but they feel stuck, they feel scattered, they feel helpless. Please do go and speak to Rory about that and contact him through the self-help bookshelf. But say for me, my absolute passion is about breaking that cycle where we spend less focus on parenting teens and more focus on mentoring our teenagers and young adults, because mentoring is powerful in itself. It builds trust, it builds compassion, it teaches them, because if you're talking to them with compassion and empathy and understanding, then they are learning compassion, empathy, and understanding. But if we're parenting them with control and orders and demands, then they are learning to control, order, and demand. And they're going to do it back to you in return, and you're going to have clashes. We want them to pay back to you compassion, empathy, and understanding. And it begins with these conversations. So I am so passionate about these conversations. I want to bring more and more and more of them to the Parenting Teens podcast. If you have listened to this through today, thank you. Well done. It is so courageous and powerful to be able to be a part of breaking the cycle and to be an awesome parent who wants to see a better future. So please do help me reach other parents as well, because by reaching other parents, we help other teenagers. This is how we change the culture on the wider scope. So please help by like, subscribe, and share my channel, share this video, and tell others about the power of parenting teens with personal development skills and mentoring by paying it forward with top-down learning. So I'll be back next week and we're going to bring in more powerful topics. I have got so many listed out. I've already listed out an entire year's worth of topics. We are not going to run out of ideas, I guarantee you. So have a great week. And please let me know in the comments below anything that came out of this for you with your teenagers, any challenges you've had, whether the conversation itself became a barrier. And if there's another way you need to approach it, please talk to me. We will help find it out. And if you need some one-to-one mentoring from me to get through bigger barriers with them, reach out through my website. Again, the link will be in the description. I'll see you again next week for another episode of Parenting Teens with Personal Development. Bye-bye.